Welcome, everybody, to another recording of the Inverted Podcast. And I'm super excited to be joined again today by my friends Dario and Dana. Sorry that Tom couldn't be here for this recording, but his entire family is down with his stomach bug. So we wish him all the best and a speedy recovery to him and those in his household. If you, as always, if you want to, talk with us, you know where to find us on LinkedIn, where you can find the posts of these episodes. We're on YouTube, we're on Spotify, we're on Apple Music now. And if you want to join a group of like-minded individuals, talk about security, ask questions, you can find the Inverted Product community on LinkedIn also. And with that out of the way, let's get into the subject of this week, which we want to talk about using cost or a cost mindset in order to defend our products from badness. And I want to start with you, Dario. When we talk about costs, what do we actually mean?
Yeah, I mean, uh, we mean like the steps and the infrastructure and the tools the attackers need in order to perform their bad actions. So, for example, if a bad actor wants to create fake accounts in order to do fake engagements with ads or any other content, you can increase the costs by making it harder to make that at scale. I mean, I think fake account is a really good example. Like it's getting harder and harder to make that at scale on the more on the top platforms. So you're significantly increasing the cost and reducing the business model of the attacker.
So you're basically making it more expensive for the attacker to do the abuse that they do in the hope that it gets so expensive for them to do the badness that it's not worth it anymore and they go away.
Yeah, I mean, like, let's assume that, or we know that most attackers are financially driven. Like the amount of attackers that do it out of purpose or mission or like activists, that is very small. So all those financial driven attackers, they need to keep their margins up and they need to be able to make a profit out of that. And that's what we're trying to avoid by making it economically less interesting or uninteresting at all.
And Dana, why, as security professionals, is it useful for us to think about cost as a mindset when we think about our security?
Because it's you're adding barriers to bad actors, and your ultimate goal is to make it cost more to perpetrate some fraud or crime on your platform versus other platforms, and your hope is that that'll drive them away or dissuade them from doing that activity. There's you basically, the cost, there's different mechanisms for cost, and you basically want to up that cost to the bad actor based on your, what you see as their attacker journey, what they're trying to do, while minimizing the cost on your valid users, basically. And the end result is to get them to move away from your system.
So basically, we focus on cost to break the business model of the attacker, right?
Correct.
And I guess when we think about cost, in my journey of protecting users from account takeover or hijacking, it also helps me to find those parts of the attacker journey where I can actually inject cost.
Cost. Yeah.
Where and so it helps me to look at the attacker journey in an entirely new way. Because if I have to, if I have to think about what costs do hijacking companies actually incur and how can I add more or increase it, that helps me to completely reevaluate my attacker journey.
I think I think it would help if we talk about like examples of
Yes,
adding
please.
cost, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Like an example might be uh round tripping. We already mentioned like round tripping an SMS code. That might incur a cost because the bad actor, if it's throttled, the bad actor might have to get multiple phones to be able to do that at any type of scale. It could be throttling like email sends, as you were talking about, looking at your journey and having it throttled, meaning they have to have multiple accounts to do the thing they want to do. It could be um locking the flow to a device, which means they'd have to get multiple devices or access to the device, and that's a big cost to the bad actor. It could be time. Like you could say, hey, um, we'll do this following step in 7 days. It's a huge cost to the bad actor because he's got to track everything. It could be tracking something like making them memorize the phone number because they have to round trip a code to the same phone number the next day, which is a huge cost to them to maintain the infrastructure of knowing what their attack is. So there's lots of different things that you can use to impose costs on these bad actors, and it's basically causing them problems is kind of the way I
Causing
see
them
it.
problems. I love it. I remember seeing some YouTube clip a little while ago about these phone farms that have like racks and racks of phones. And some of them don't even have screens and stuff. They're just hooked up to some, it looks to me like a mainframe. I'm not as technical as you both are. And they just
Right,
constantly have to factory reset phones and then do it again. And I'm like, wow, we actually made them rent an apartment for this, and put and buy all these phones and put them in and go
right,
through lots of trouble just to be able to do some, I don't know, some Play Store boosting or YouTube boosting or whatever they do with these phone farms. But I think,
right,
yeah, that was a really great example of what you just said. You know, we gave them cost, now they need devices. But then
right,
obviously they're also so creative that okay, we make them get devices. They actually got devices. They put them in an apartment. It's pretty amazing.
right. But then if you look at that example and then you say, okay, well, if you make them like round trip a code or log in from that same device a day later, right? Just adding in your flow that you're trying to protect, they've already wiped the device and tried to redo something else in that farm, and to for them to keep that consistency, that's adding a huge cost to them. So just another example of like
Yeah.
you really need to be creative when thinking about these things
Yeah,
and
and for
understand.
example, if all of these phones are hanging in the same apartment, it means they probably have at least similar IP addresses. So now, if we make them have different IPs and geos, now hijackers have to control fleets of IPs all around the world, or abusers, or whatever the bad actor is, in order to really appear as a group of non-related people. And so this way we can keep making their life harder. Dario?
Yeah, I think I think one of the interesting follow-ups, maybe in this conversation or in a separate one, would be like there is really a spectrum of cost injecting methods you can do. Like creating a new email address is very cheap. You could say it's almost for free. Creating a new phone number can be more expensive, especially if you exclude VoIP providers, because then with a new phone number you have to use a correct telco operator that might have additional checks where you have to go in person. So you have a huge spectrum of how do you increase those costs. And as a PM, you really think about those. We understand the attacker journey. How much are attackers able to spend to do whatever scam they want to do, and then you raise it up to things like you need a dedicated device for something to use a specific service, which then means a dedicated IP address, dedicated USB socket. I mean, all those costs to acquire and to maintain those attack farms for these scammers are getting up. And if there's scammers that want to steal your Hilton loyalty points, that might become economically unattractive or not even viable anymore. If they're trying to steal your cryptocurrencies, then it becomes a different it's still viable with the same cost injecting measure. So yeah, I think there should be a graph, or maybe we should write a blog post at some point to show how the spectrum goes from soft to really expensive
Yeah,
injection.
I hope no one ever stole your Hilton loyalty points, Dario. It hasn't happened to me yet, but yeah, you're right. You're talking about this balance, right? Like how much effort do you put versus as a user also, like versus how much there is value on the other side. So if I go to my crypto or if I go to other things, I have a lot of work to do to get in those things. if I go to my Hilton points, there's a little bit less work. And I think another part of balance is balancing the cost we give to attackers and the cost we give to real users. And Dana, I want to ask you to like, can you describe some of the things you've seen where it's been a good balance between giving costs to attackers but not to real users?
Sure. What you, I mean, what you really need to understand is that in these detection systems, there's always false positives. You're always gonna trigger on a valid user at some point, and you need to make sure that when the valid user hits these scenarios, that they're able to get through the flow more easily, or the cost is much less compared to that of the bad actor. Also, if it's like account compromise or something, the barrier that you give the valid, if the two bad and good users are trying to get in the account at the same time, the barrier that you give the valid user is not a big deal, but that same barrier that you give to the bad actor is a bigger deal for it, that allows the valid user to get in. So some examples are like we mentioned is like round tripping an SMS code, right? Like everybody has a phone number, so if I pop up, it might be inconvenient for that user to have to round trip a code to their phone, but for a bad actor who has to do that at scale thousands and thousands of times, then having that infrastructure is a cost for them. Likewise, if you then say, hey, like we're gonna lock it to a certain number or a certain phone, the cost for the valid user, my phone is already on the account. The bad actor, if they want to round trip that code, has to somehow trick me into giving them the code or get on my device. So that raises the cost to the bad actor. Um, and if you look at cost, like kind of an extreme is like if you lock it to a device, so like somehow hardware lock something to a device, it's not a big deal for the user because they have the device, where the bad actor might to to complete the flow might have to actually get access to your device, which is a huge cost. So as you go, you're upping the cost of a bad actor, and you're trying to minimize or make it easy for costs for a valid user. Another example of cost, I mentioned time, right? So you might have an account that's compromised, and you have the bad actor and the good user in there. You might say like, hey, like I'm not sure whose account it is, so I'm going to impose a cooling off time, like a month or 7 days while we figure this out, which is makes it, I mean, it's not a good experience, and there's cost to the valid user, but they'll probably keep their account. But the bad actor, that cost is really high because the bad actor, he or she will probably get discovered during that time, and that's a huge cost, right? And so these costs that we add are they vary, and you really need to minimize the cost on the valid user, and maximize the cost on the bad actor, because if the cost is too high on the valid user, and this is super important, that user might walk away from your system, right? Like you don't want these costs to discourage the valid user, and so you have to consider all of these things when you look at imposing costs.
Yeah, and I want to, before I go to you, Dario, with another question, I want to just quickly share a story which I didn't tell you happened to me a few weeks ago. I get this phone call from someone with a certain accent claiming to be from Microsoft Support Services. And so I answer my phone and they say, hey, I'm here from Microsoft Support Services. And I get all excited. And I say, wow, you're a hacker. And I've never been called by a hacker. I'm so excited to talk to you today. And the guy gets silent for 5 seconds. He says, no, sir, I'm from Microsoft Support Services. He said, no, I know how this works. You're a hacker, and you hack for a living. I have so many questions. And he gets silent and he said, hey, like, who gives you the accounts? Do you need to go find them? And he said, no, my boss gives them to me. And I said, oh, well, how much do you have to make per hijacked account? And he said between $500 to $1,200, which to me was like a super high amount. I was really shocked by that. And then I said, like, and like, do you have a target or something? And then he said, no, sir, I'm gonna hang up now. And then he hung up. So I hope they put a cross behind my phone number now. But the next person I'm coming, I now have my entire questionnaire ready for them. But it basically means that they have targets. They have to get like more than $1,000 from a hacked account via the scheme, which means that the question to you for Dario is like, for us as users, as victims, if I have to wait, there's not really a financial cost, right? The cost for us are more non-financial. It's our time, it's our annoyance. But for a company has a target, this person had to get $500 to $1,200 out of every hacked account. They're actually measured. So for them, it's actually much more financial, the cost, than for victims. Would you agree?
Yeah, I mean, for them it's a business model. Like these are outbound call centers that are meant to make sales. They're not making sales of legitimate products that we would want to sponsor this podcast, but they're making sales of a product. So in the end, they have to make more sales than what their process costs them. So yeah, if you have to make 500 to 1,000 bucks, whatever your unit of monies are, per successful victim or per successful sales, that indicates how many unsuccessful sales you're going to have. And I think this is a really interesting business model to show how you can inflict costs. Like if it gets harder to reach people, like anyone who lives or has ever lived in the US has stopped picking up phones from unknown numbers because it's just I mean, I still don't do it after 6 years of living there. I don't pick up calls from unknown numbers. So that already is a societal change that increases the cost and makes these business model less attractive, because now they have to get more numbers, dial more numbers, and to get at least even somebody on the call. So yeah, thanks for sharing. That is a very interesting insight. And those employees, they have goals, because otherwise you replace the employee number 5 with somebody else because they're using a phone desk. They're using company bandwidth, their resources. No matter if you sell toner or printer paper or fake antiviruses, it's a business model.
Yeah. Well, and then if you make them, we all stop answering unknown phone numbers. I've also stopped answering them. Some people can't because they are in a sales role. They need to be reachable or other things. But what I do answer is when I see that like a certain company is calling me because Google's taking this from Google Maps, or when like one of my health providers calls me, or the dentist or something, because here in Switzerland they still do. So now if I'm a hacker, I would try and get a business on Google Maps with the number registered, so that when I call, that number shows up in the call screen, right? So that now we're injecting that cost. Now they have to make Google Maps listings, and then we can catch them on Google Maps. If we see a lot of listings made by the same IP address, then we can take them all down at once, and even fix our call identifier system to say possible spammer, right? So we can do all these things, and then they have to now make the listings not look like they're made by one person, but they have to get the same. So in that sense, we can keep making it harder. We can keep going ahead of them, whatever, and inject costs, right? And wherever they get, it gets more expensive for them. Now they have to do Google Maps listings. Or you go to Google Maps. We make it harder for them to do listings, right? And etc.
Yeah. I mean, it's
and that's
of reach as well. Like it's on the spectrum. So sorry, Dana. Like you have on one side, we limit per IP address. Mimicking additional IP addresses is relatively cheap by still maintaining the reach. But then if you want to use spoof phone numbers that come from your region, because people only pick up phone calls from their own region, then you're limiting the reach for more costs. And so you're making it much less attractive, because with or without the Google Map entry, you then can only have a premium call for like a fewer number of people with the same phone number.
Dana?
Yeah, sorry, Dana.
I was just going to say, it really is an area for the product managers, the security teams to think about. Like there are so many different types of costs that you can create. Like, for instance, like a cost that people use now is making the web browser run a calculation, like a crypto transaction, like run a crypto operation, because it'll cost a bad actor like 5 seconds in the browser. But what is that time for a valid user? It doesn't cost anything, but for the bad actor, it stops the amount of things that they can do in that time period, right? Or we were talking about, you have all these package delivery services. Everybody has a package delivery service. They get signatures. So what happens if a cost was like to get your account back? You we sent like a letter to the house that you had to sign and then return back, right? Because we knew your signature, they could verify your signature, we could get it back, you could use existing infrastructure. Like that's a huge cost to the bad actor compared to a valid thing for a good user. So there's like, you could go in all different directions to try to figure out costs, things that'll cost a bad actor that are not so hard for a valid user.
Yeah, exactly. And I think one thing I'm gonna bring up, which we didn't discuss before, and is that we had this massive retail hijack in Europe, in the UK, a few weeks or months ago. I think it started in April, and those are one of those things that you see, and you're like, oh, I feel so bad for these companies, and I hope they have real great partners to get them back online and to figure out what happens and to help rebuild trust. And then all of a sudden, I saw this article this morning that they've actually made 4 arrests. Along they've made 4 arrests, some minors even, for this thing, the National Cyber Insurance or Cyber Security Institute in the UK. I forgot the name. And this comes back to cost as well, right? Like they also had to make a decision: how much are we going to invest in not being caught versus what we are going to get out of this? Because they could have somehow, this Cybersecurity Institute from the UK was able to backtrack them enough to have enough suspicion to make arrests, right? So that means that they had to be able to go and hop the chain backwards through servers and networks and other things in order to decide, hey, I find a person that lives somewhere and I'm going to arrest them. And what's really interesting to me is that these people lived in the UK. They've made arrests in the UK, right? I always thought that these types of attacks would originate from outside of the UK. Maybe they had help outside, but at least there were 4 people that are, again, these people are innocent until proven guilty, but there's enough suspicion to get them. And so they make the conscious decision, like, this is how much we're willing to invest. And apparently it was expensive enough in this case for them not to invest more, and now they got caught, right? So they also made this decision, like, oh, we're going to get more service, or we're going to wait a few more months, or we're going to get more assets to attack this company, we're going to invest in not being traceable. So I guess this is another place where someone did something right because they decided not to invest more, they capped their cost, and they got caught. Dario, you wanted to respond?
Yeah, I mean, it really shows that security hygiene and OPSEC is expensive. Like it's the same as it is if you want to implement safe operational processes in a company to be on a defensive side as an attacker. If you want to stay uncaught and unidentified, if you want to make attribution harder or less likely to succeed, you have to invest, and you invest in infrastructure, you invest in processes that might slow you down in your activities, but then you also invest in people. And yeah, I mean, if you don't have 10-20 years in experience in these types of attack projects, then you might not have the same operational security as somebody else, or you have to hire more people to establish a higher operational security, which then makes the business model less attractive. So it's a really interesting model where you start to see real world crime economics fit as well, because the government has almost unlimited resources to catch criminals. And in this case, where it had a real world impact. I mean, I've been to co-ops and other shops in recent months where some shelves were just empty, like because they couldn't deliver fresh fruit, they couldn't deliver vegetables, they couldn't deliver dairy products to some of their or many of their shops because of the cyber attack. So as a government or as a country, then you start to step it up, and that's interesting to see that. And it results in this case, it resulted in arrests within the country. Often what it does, it results in an attribution and says this was the actor from probably country X, Y, and Z, and maybe they can identify who is behind that actor. So they are not traveling to your country anymore. But beyond that is a very rare case. So kudos to them.
Dana, any response?
I think about it. The your both responses led me to start thinking about threat sharing. And like we talked about cost, imposing cost on a bad actor so they'd move away from the platform, like, or that attack on your platform. Their infrastructure is still there, though. They just pivot to either another attack scenario using the same infrastructure, which is not too hard, or attack, your competitor, right? But what you really want to do is impose cost to take out their infrastructure, which is a big cost to them because they can't really perpetrate their activities at that point in time. And that's why that's one of the reasons to threat share with other people in your industry or with the government, is so you can take action on their infrastructure and make a more durable cost to the adversary versus just trying to get them to move away. Like the cost makes them move off your attack flow or your platform, right?
Yeah, and I think we'll definitely have a future episode on like threat sharing, and we're gonna try and find some cool friends of ours to join this podcast for that. But maybe ending today, like if someone's listening to this podcast or looking at us and they're thinking about, oh wow, I would love to adopt this mindset in my company where maybe their responsibility, 10% of their work is to also do security, or maybe they're in a big company and they want to bring this mindset in. What are some practical steps? Start with you, Dario. What are some practical steps they could take to implement this?
I mean, it starts with understanding the attacker journey. Like, how are attackers doing their harm on your platform? And then compare that to how good users, how good people are doing their good acts on your platform, and then figure out what the gap is and how can you make it less scalable for attackers to do their harm. But yeah, you need to understand the attack journey, and then you start to introduce speed bumps like SMS, like other things.
So you understand the attacker journey, Dana, and then what?
I think you need to understand how they're actually monetizing or leveraging the attack, because you want to make sure that the defenses that you come up with are sufficient to, and impose sufficient costs. An example we kind of skirted around was like crypto mining, like if they're gonna make like thousands of dollars from crypto mining, and you enforce making them have a SMS number, a unique SMS number, what's spending $50 on a burner phone when they're gonna make $1,000? It's nothing. Or making them do something manual, like manually creating an account versus stopping like a synthetic account creation. The scale, the potential monetization makes it a no-brainer for the bad actor just to bypass your protection or to comply with your protection mechanisms. But if you're looking at it and they're trying to create like 1,000 accounts to send spam, then that speed bump of round tripping an SMS might be enough to stop. So you really need to understand their end motivation and their end financial gain to understand what your protection systems, the way they're going to impact them, the bad actors.
So again, I think we covered a bunch of cool things. We talked about what kind of costs attackers incur. We've heard an example of a business model and a hacker with a target. And we've talked a lot about different types of costs and the trade-off with injecting costs to the attacker versus the real user. And yeah, practically speaking, if people want to really think about this, they should identify the attacker journey, identify the place where they can inject cost, and then really try to understand the bad actor's business model to make sure it's enough to make a difference and not just be friction. And yeah, I'm grateful again, Dario, Dana, for your insights as always.
This was fun.
Thank you. And for those of you listening or watching us, again, you can find all of us on LinkedIn. You can find the Inverted Product Group on LinkedIn as well. And you can find this podcast in all the different regular places. And if you have feedback or if there's subjects you want us to discuss, please do not hesitate to reach out. And with that, thank you again for listening or watching wherever you are. and we'll see you in the next one.